All right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Welcome to our second edition of Franchise Things. And today's presentation is, do you make this mistake with your franchisee's insurance? And this is presented by Mike Drum of Drum Law. And I'm honored to have both Doug and Heath Groves with us today. And Doug, why are you qualified to talk about insurance? Or Heath, can you give us a little background on who you are, what you do?
I'll go first, I guess. We've been in this insurance business about 35 years, and we handle other franchisees and E's insurance for about the last 10 or 12 years. And we have quite a lot of experience in the franchise world and in the insurance world. We are licensed coast to coast from California to New York and Florida. We can handle franchisees on behalf of franchisors all over the country, and we enjoy it. Today I have my son, Heath Groves, is with us. Heath, take off.
I came out of the franchise. There is a big
Doug, that's your Doug. You have to mute your speaker when he's talking.
Yeah.
All right.
As a franchisee, I just muted him. Came out of the franchise world as a franchisee of a restaurant concept, and then took that into the insurance world. So I understand both sides of it now, as being a franchisee and able to work with the franchisees on their insurance and understand what they go through on a daily basis, and just took that to the insurance world.
Excellent. And I know you
5
guys
years.
have the Program Insurance Group. You also have Guardify, which, if you don't mind spending 30 seconds, and then talk about Easy Cert to start off. Doug, you got to unmute, my friend, when you're talking.
How about now?
Perfect.
Good. Guardifies are actually franchise when we franchise ourselves. We franchise Program Insurance Group to allow more people to be in the business and give us an opportunity to spread our insurance products across the country as we do it. It's kind of a new franchise system that we're up and running, and got a good FDD, and we'll get past COVID. We'd like to put a lot more effort into that deal. And then our third business that we represent today is Easy Cert Management, which is a certificate tracking computer program that we came up with, and we help franchisors track the insurance that the franchisees actually carry and they purchase, and compare it to the FDD required coverages on that particular brand. And we produce a compliance report on behalf of the franchisor that tells them how many franchises they have and what those individual franchisees are actually buying for insurance. So that's it's a service that we provide on behalf of the franchisors.
All right, Doug, let's move right into it. I want to talk about, I draft FDDs, and I don't really understand much about insurance as far as I use my template. Here's what's required. It can change over time. So I wouldn't mind. Let's start talking about, let's take it back to the beginning. If you're a brand new franchisor, I'm franchising Drum Pizza, how do I know what I need?
Well, insurance products are pretty similar for all franchisors. Everybody has a general liability. Everybody has workers' compensation. Everybody has auto. Everybody has property. Everybody has umbrella. So we take the exposures of the particular brand, and we try to lay out what we assume, what we project will happen in a loss basis, and then we suggest coverages based on that. We have reference books we can look at and say, okay, well, claims for this type of business are heavily, they have workers' compensation issues. They have hand issues. They have accident with their cars if there's delivery deal. So we kind of hope that the franchise attorney that is working with the brand is kind of working in conjunction with us, the insurance people, and are putting the right coverages in the FDDs, because that's where it starts. You can't be general on the FDD required coverages. You need to be very specific. In other words, if you want general liability, you need to tell them how much general liability. If you want them to have workers' compensation, you need to tell the franchisees the limits that the work comp policy must have. If you have auto exposures, you have to spell it out in the FTD. And it has to be spelled out in detail for the franchisees to follow with their or her insurance provider.
So we have to first determine what kind of insurance we need.
So we have to put thought into the types of exposures of loss. Well, we are going to usually start at $1 million for general liability, and $1 million for automobile, $1 million for workers' compensation, and $1 million for umbrella. We don't like to sell limits less than that. I know those seem like big numbers, but if you get involved in any kind of significant litigation, $1 million gets eaten up quite fast. The reality of it, the difference between $500,000 or $100,000 policy is significantly, is so insignificant, that extra cost to be at $1 million. If we got called into the courthouse by recommending lower limits, we're going to get embarrassed, and we don't like to be embarrassed. So
okay, like that.
That's kind of the way that we pick limits, and from there we move up. Actually, in the insurance business, the basic rule is to always make the insurance more attractive than your customer. So when somebody gets hurt, we want them to take the insurance and leave our customer alone. We don't ever want to flip where the customer is more attractive than our insurance, and they don't want the insurance. They would rather have the customer. So we're protecting the customer, and we need to make insurance more attractive than the customer.
I love that. That's a great way to put it.
It's a very easy way to know how much limits do I need. Just look at your balance sheet and what you're protecting.
Okay. And let's talk, what happens, I'm a franchisor, what if the franchisee doesn't do their job? They don't get the right insurance, they let it lapse. What happens? What's my exposure? How do I fix it? What are the risks?
Well, the risk to the franchisor ultimately is a plaintiff attorney who is representing somebody that has been injured on a premises. Let's say it was in California or it's in New York. The franchisor has some control over that franchisee, and the plaintiff attorney actually doesn't want the franchisee in the scheme of things. They want the franchisor. So they're going to try to marry those two together so that they can go after what they feel is deeper pockets at the franchisor level. So the reason the FTD requires insurance, the reason that the FTD requires the franchisee name the franchisor as additional named insured, those are all backstops so that the litigation in California doesn't get into the pocket of the franchisor at their home office, whether it be Arizona or California, wherever it is. So the franchise business is a wonderful business. It allows you to grow your business quite fast with independent business people around the country. Losses that happen at that location, we don't want to end up in the franchisor's pocket. And so we're trying to stop that.
Excellent. And let's talk about, we have business interruption here. And it's funny, I had a client in Denver that they're on a corner of the street, and all of a sudden someone's doing work on, and we don't know if it was Comcast, if it was the city, but they hit a sewage line, and my client's building, no more sewage, no more water. And we had to shut them down, but I said, and they're calling me, and I go, well, let's figure out who did it. Let's get the state involved, get the landlord involved. But I go, do you have business interruption insurance? And he goes, oh, I didn't even think about that, because when you have sewage issues and you don't have working restrooms and you're a bar or restaurant, your business is definitely interrupted.
Yes, like Texas was 2 weeks ago when we had 5 to 7 days of somewhere between 0 and 20 degrees below zero, or 20 degrees in temperature. We were shut down, and then power, when we lost power, you were really shut down. As much as you tried to be open, you're shut down. So business interruption coverages, business interruption exposures need to be addressed, because the quicker we can get a business back in business, the quicker they can start paying their royalty again. If they don't have business interruption insurance and they don't have the financial wherewithal to rebuild or to withstand a sewage loss or a power loss, then that franchisee has the danger of not coming back on board, and they stay shut forever. The last thing a franchisor wants is that franchisee not to be open. That's how they generate revenue, their royalties. So we want to have a mechanism that speeds the insurance settlement, the insurance claim payment faster. And I think business interruption will speed up the pace at which a claim is handled on behalf of the franchisees. If we're going to talk about franchisees and franchisors today, that's our language.
Now, so, Doug, does business interruption pay on revenue or profit? How does that work?
Usually pays you, will reimburse for unreimbursed expenses like mortgage payments, rent payments, even if you have to move, could be an extra expense coverage, stuff like that. It will keep payroll going during the time that you're down. It's a more of an expense alleviator to keep expenses from eating the customer up while we're not producing revenue. So I hate to say it will replace profit because I think there's some things under business interruption that won't be covered if that expense stops. And it clearly stops and then restarts when you start again. That wouldn't happen. We wouldn't be paying expenses. It's designed to cover expenses that are ongoing, irregardless of whether the franchisee is open or not. And
so Doug, what we do
nowadays on an unlimited basis.
What we do is we actually will then include business interruption proceeds as part of gross revenue for our franchisors, so that our franchisors will actually get their 5% royalty on the business interruption insurance. Is there a better way to do that?
Yes. Yes, I think then you've got an expense by contract on behalf of the franchisee, and I would put that in my business interruption claim. I saw one this morning, I read the FDD that they had required the franchisee to have 12 months of royalty payments available in their business interruption experience also. I think that's becoming more common where they, irregardless of what happened at the location, if insurance is available, the franchisor would like to collect on that part that they're out.
So maybe franchising's practical tip number one, Doug, is to require that the business interruption insurance of the franchisee include royalty payments.
Yes, obviously we see a lot of attorneys write FDDs on behalf of franchisors. Some attorneys are not as experienced and write as many FDDs as others. So we can usually pretty quickly pick up, when I read an FDD, I say, this language, I haven't even read about language like this in 10 years, or somebody had handcrafted, and it's typically, as much as I usually hate to ask a franchisor, who wrote your FDD? And these are some issues that we find, and we only live in the insurance paragraphs. And so we're making a judgment on the quality of the FDD attorney based on that insurance paragraph. And sometimes maybe we have some lacking things, but that's where we can suggest. And if it's a new emerging franchise, or we can catch it in time and get some changes made, or we wait a year. And typically attorneys will bury somewhere in the document some amount of language that if they need to change some limits or some coverages, they can do that if it's an immediate, necessarily, like it's already issued, but we probably need to change these limits.
So you're saying I can probably get rid of the Y2K coverage? I don't need to put that in my FDD anymore?
Yeah, you might. I think 2020 was Y2K for all of us. It was.
Yeah, it was just 20 years late.
Y2K that it finally showed up 20 years later. We got it. So.
All right, Doug, take us away on the next slide, if you don't mind, sir.
Well, this is where Easy Cert is so important. We think that a franchisor must monitor the insurance purchases of a franchisee. As the system grows, as you spread out, people that start out with the correct coverages because we went to a closing table, everything was fine. You go about 3 renewals. Insurance normally renews annually. Some automobile insurance might even renew 6 months. But as you go down the timeline, the franchisee tends to drift away from the FDD. They don't do it intentionally. They meet an insurance guy when they're playing golf or fishing buddy, and he says, man, I could sell you some liability insurance a lot cheaper. And they don't ask about the existence of an FDD. They don't understand why coverages were written the way they were. So you get about 2 or 3 years down the road, and you will have franchisees way out in left field or even over the fence. They're not either carrying any coverage. They didn't pay the bill. They get hoodwinked into buying coverages that's substantially inferior to what the FDD requires, and then litigation comes and we all find out what exactly was purchased. And it's, from the franchisor standpoint, it's too expensive to find out what the coverage the franchisee buys after the loss. We got to know before the loss. And we can't do anything after the car wreck or after the fire or after the slip and fall. So we got to know ahead of time. And things that you monitor will be adhered to. That's kind of rule number 1. If you don't monitor it, people will drift away and they will make their own decisions. So we're trying to protect the franchisor. If you have 100 locations and you have 5 coverages required under your 100 locations, you've got 500 pieces of paper coming into your office to monitor that insurance purchases every year, because it renews every year. And you have to understand how to read a certificate. You have to understand all that stuff. So we created a business to do that on behalf of franchisors, where we input the FDD required language. We put the purchases that the franchisee actually purchases, and they are either compliant or they're non-compliant per the FDD. And then we report that to the franchisor, and the franchisor deals with that in the way that their FDD says they deal with it. Some brands will make you non-compliant. There's all kinds of things you can be non-compliant in the franchise world on. Insurance is just one of them. And every brand would have a different set of rules to follow, actions to follow, 10 days to cure to follow, 30 days to cure, whatever. We try to stay out of that. We're just trying to give the information to the franchisor of what their insurance compliance looks like across the country. And that company is called Cert, and that's Cert's job every day to look at certificates all day, all night, and they produce compliance reports.
So Doug, my lawyer brain's working here, and what I'm envisioning at a minimum and I'll recommend this and maybe hopefully work with you as a bonus to anyone who wants it, is at least a checklist, right? You said 500 pieces of paper coming in. Yeah, that seems overwhelming, but I can imagine at a minimum I need to make sure I have all 5 pieces of coverage, like 1, right? Yeah. 2, check the dates. I want to make sure that the policy is current and going to go for another year. And then 3, I need to have the franchisor named as an additional insured.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any of that?
Yes, and Cert does all those things. It verifies limits, it verifies dates, it verifies named insured, it verifies additional named insured, which is typically the franchisor. And it verifies the coverage. And if it's something that needs to be kicked out and looked at, either I will get involved and look at it, or Heath will look at it, and we'll call the agent, we'll call the customer and find out, hey, what we're looking at here doesn't make sense, what you produced, what have you. And a lot of times the insurance professional on the other end of it who wrote the particular policy, there's sometimes a really good chance that maybe they just don't know how to fill out a certificate correctly. But we do all that work on behalf of the franchisor, because reading a certificate of insurance, the difference between an occurrence-based deal and and an aggregate limit and carriers. All of that information is on that certificate of liability insurance. But typically we find that a franchisor that is a haircutter doesn't have any insurance expertise on their staff, somebody to monitor all these pieces of paper. And you have to monitor them for renewal and for adequacy on limits and stuff like that.
All right, so, Doug, I got this wonderful certificate of liability insurance on the screen here.
It's a beautiful thing.
This has already put me to sleep. Is this something that's uniform? This will always look like this, or if I go from State Farm or somewhere else, is it going to look different, or is there a one format?
99% of the time, unless you're a dynamite manufacturer or something way off in the woods, this is the form that people use to transmit insurance information that is currently in force for the particular insured. So this is the document that we work off of to verify the coverage. So like the first one is the producer, then the insured, and then the companies are listed A, B, C, D, E, and F are all different lines of coverage, because as you go down the certificate from general liability to automobile liability to workers' compensation, not always or very rarely is one company taking all of the risk of one franchisee. So we have different companies putting different limits and deals. So this is what we read, and this is our lifeblood for the EasyCert business, because this is a report on the insurance that the franchisee actually purchased. And then we add this to the FDD required coverages.
All right, Doug, I'm going to walk through some of these things here. And so starting off, there's the date. That's going to be the date this is filled out. So that doesn't necessarily
That's not the renewal
start up
date.
there. Okay. And I use language. I don't know. I mean, I kind of know what it means, but I think I always require A rated, A+ rated. Can you talk about that? Because I'm sure if this said Drum Law Insurance in the producer, that's probably not a good idea, because I'm not an insurance company.
Good. Yeah.
So can you talk about that? What's this? Because I just use it. I mean, who doesn't want an A+, right? I love A+. So that's what I use in my FDDs, but talk to me about that.
Well, that's the insurance companies are rated by their financial strength. They're called a best rating guide. Typically an A15, A+ 15, A+ 7. Any A+ rated carrier is normally going to be capable of withstanding the risk of that franchisee. So that's what a lot of times that insurer that is listed there, and it won't be just Hartford or Travelers or State Farm or Nationwide. They all have different operating companies. So you have to kind of track that down and make sure that if we have an A+ rated carrier requirement, not all FDDs have an insurance company rating requirement. Some do. I think it's.
Should we, Doug? Is that a best practice?
Yeah, I think you should. If you don't, you're open to somebody like Heath and Doug's insurance company is insuring this franchisee down the street, and the paper is worthless. So I think you need a
practical tip number 2. Make sure your FDD, FA require A+, and that's easy to remember. Who, like I said, who doesn't love an A+?
That's correct. There are situations that could come up where possibly an A+ carrier is not available for this risk, but 99% of the franchises that you see, that I see, that he sees on the street are normally going to be available through the standard market, and those are A+, normally A+ rated carriers. So I would start with A+ always and adjust accordingly as I move through the world.
And let's walk me through, like I said, walk me through this wonderful certificate, Doug. What do I need to look for? Where are some traps? So we got producer, that's one. We want to make sure they're A+, if possible.
Yes, correct. So I just go to the body of where it says commercial general liability underneath all the agency and the insured information in the company. I go to the commercial general liability, and first and foremost, typically I want an occurrence-based general liability policy. It is not very uncommon to see a claims made, but typically your FTD you're going to require for is an occurrence-based policy, meaning that the claim must occur during the policy period for it to be a covered claim. And that's what we're looking for first. And then next over will be a policy name, the policy numbers, and then a really important deal is the effective dates. If I go into a brand and they pull out a file of insurance and the last effective date I saw in there was 2015, there hasn't been any work on compliance done for the last 5 years. I know we're going to be starting over. And then the first line is each occurrence. People get the occurrence and the aggregate mixed up a lot. Consumers of the insurance product do not need to concern themselves with the aggregate limit typically. They're really more concerned with the occurrence limit, each occurrence. And so there's the box that typically says if it's in these dates, we have $1 million worth of occurrence limit for this particular franchisee. That would be good information to have. The rest of the boxes in the general aggregate applies for. Those are things that when we're tracking them, we don't even track the occurrence or the aggregate limits. We're mainly tracking the occurrence limits for the franchisor.
All right, dumb question because I'm not an insurance guy. So I'm guessing occurrence means, okay, I did something, I'm suing you for $1 million and that's the occurrence, your limit's $1 million, I'm okay. But if your aggregate's $5 million and 10 people sued you for $1 million, then we're in trouble. Is that correct?
That's correct. The aggregate is the total amount of $1 million claims that we can have in the policy period and not run out of insurance. So most of the time, not all the time, most of the time the aggregate has doubled the occurrence. So you actually have 2 policy limit claims available under the general aggregate. So you'll have 1 million occurrence, you'll have a 2 million aggregate. Don't be afraid. The insurance company will reinstate the aggregate if you happen to have 3 full policy limit claims and you only had a $2 million limit and you had $3 million claims. They will reinstate the aggregate on behalf of the insured for a fee.
So generally speaking, is the 2 times rule kind of what most franchisors should look about? You got your
we'll typically see a 1 million aggregate with a $2 million aggregate. I mean, a 1 million occurrence with a $2 million aggregate requirement. I have seen 1, 3 aggregates. We've seen 2, 4, which is 2 occurrence, 4 million aggregate, more and more today than we did 10 years ago. So they will reinstate the aggregate for a fee.
The insured information, upper left, is this going to be just franchisee or is this for my franchisor going to be there as well?
No, that's just franchise. That is the insured under this policy. That needs to match your franchisee's wording. In other words, if it's Mike's LLC, DBA, franchise A, that's what I want to see in that box because that's who is covered. And there can be some issues that the franchisee is reporting that they've bought insurance, but it's bought in another name's coverage, and the franchisor needs to make sure that that information matches their information on who is the franchisee in this situation. We need to make sure that matches.
All right, so here's what I'm thinking, Doug. Is at a minimum, if I'm a franchisor, I'm going to recommend they should make a template certificate. Look here, should say minimum here, at least when they get to 500 pages, I can have a cheat sheet. I think that's a step in the right direction. Do you agree on that?
Yes, and we do that on behalf of franchisor. We'll put up a dummy certificate and say, this is what you need to send out to your franchisees. If you're not going to use us to track it for you, this is the way it needs to look.
Okay,
but it's normally pretty difficult. Everybody can track 1 piece of paper. It's when you get these things up into the hundreds that it becomes very overwhelming.
Okay.
This
looks like the important page. This is part I'm concerned about here.
This down on the bottom of the first page. It's all on 1 page. So 1 coverage can be dictated on 1 page, or we can have 5 types of coverage on 1 page. But right here where it says additional insured, that's where we want the name of the franchisor's legal entity put into that box. attorneys will write, sometimes the additional insured endorsement wording could be 3 sentences long. But if that's what they want, that's what we have to do. But that's where that information goes. And that's what protects the franchisor on behalf of a loss at the franchisee's premises, is that additional insured endorsement. And that is the most, in my mind, that is where this falls off a lot, because people go buy their insurance. The insurance provider does not know they're a franchisee. They don't know that there's FDD requirements, and they sure don't know that there's additional insured endorsement wording. And if you're not checking on that, I would guess somewhere between 75 and 80% of your franchisees would not have this done correctly.
Or you run into the place where, again, we'll use Drum Pizza as our example again. And in the additional insured part, they just put Drum Pizza. Well, if there's 500 Drum Pizzas across the country, well, which one does that actually apply to? And instead of it being, Drum Pizza, whether they're under a different entity like Drum Pizza Franchising LLC as the actual entity for the franchisor, that's not actually being listed, which doesn't really do the franchisor much good when there's 500 Drum Pizzas out there and the additional insured just says Drum Pizza.
And Heath, I got another one on there. So I got Drum Pizza, which is the franchisor, but Drum Cheese LLC actually supplies all the cheese. Yeah. Now, I'm guessing we should put the franchisor supplier affiliates, correct?
Absolutely.
Correct. Depending on how it's what's liable, what's responsible for things. Yes, I mean you want to have as much protection as possible to make sure the franchisee's insurance lists each of those entities that belong to the franchisor that are listed in the FDD.
Now, I have a general question that you may not be able to answer, but I can see a franchisee not wanting to spend the money. How much does it cost? Is there to add additional insureds? Is it like double? Is it cost a lot more? Is it per party, or how does that work?
Typically, some insurance companies won't charge at all. Some charge $150 per signature per additional insurance. Typically, we sell the insured what we call a blanket additional insured endorsement. And that means anytime you call us, we can add additional insured endorsements for no money at all. So, it might be a fee of like $100 for a year to add blanket additional named insureds onto the policy. Every insurance company works a little bit different. Typically, we're going to do blanket additional named insured endorsements on behalf of our customers, but each customer has to negotiate that with their insurance provider directly. But there
that's franchise thing tip 3, Doug.
Yeah.
Look for the blanket additional insured, especially if you're just starting off, because we have one entity normally, but as you grow, we have other entities. And I've seen the ad fund entity get named in a lawsuit. When something bad happens, we didn't advertise that something bad may happen if you come to our location. So you may even have more entities as you grow. So I love that idea. So I think that's tip number 3, blanket additional insured.
As the purchaser of insurance, if you're having to provide certificates of insurance on your business, blanket would always be the way to go. And that way we're not arguing over that every month that we call in and say, oh, we need to add a new one. And now, a year goes by and you got $1,500 worth of charges there. That's the incorrect way to handle that.
Excellent. And this kind of leads right into the next question. Like, what is the difference between, we got additional named insured versus additional insured?
Well, very simply, I like to say the additional insured, additional named insured, the additional named insured gets all the benefits of the named insured except the premium payment responsibility. So they have all the same rights that the named insured has, the name of who's insured in the box, except premium payment. So that's good. They're held to all this, they get all the rights of the named insured except premium payment. So
that's having your cake and eating it too, actually.
Yeah, right? For the franchisor, that's all that. Remember, the franchisor is building a wall to stop litigation for coming to their doorstep for claims that should have been covered on the franchisee's level. And that's the way that you do that. So it doesn't increase, it doesn't stop litigation from coming. It doesn't increase the limits of the franchisee's coverage because you're additional named insured under there, but it gives the franchisor the same rights to the policy that the insured has.
How much more is it to become an additional named versus additional? Is it more expensive to have more? Once again, we talked about blanket. Maybe it's $150 per entity. Is it now even more to have additional named?
No, those typically are not charged for. So when you set up the policy, you're going to tell your provider of coverage, I need, 2 additional named insureds. List them. Now, that's not going to affect the premium at all. It's when the policy's in place, we're going to go back and we're going to send a certificate that they usually have a fee if you didn't buy blanket.
What should be the general rule for franchisors and franchise attorneys? Should we always require to be additional named? Is there any reason you wouldn't want to be additional named versus just additional insured?
Additional named. I think additional insured is not as good as additional named insured, and I think the language that we typically recommend or see is additional named insured.
Excellent. I like that. My concern was if this is going to drive the price up, is additional insured good enough that I don't want to put that additional fee on my franchisee? But I think if you talk to your broker, it may not, and then you're getting more coverage.
Correct. When you're the purchaser of the policy, you're going to be naming your franchisor as additional named insured. You need to do that at the beginning because once a claim's happened again, that's when we run into issues, and the insurance companies never do anything after the claim.
Okay, and then something you said, actually, a thought came to me, Doug, that the lawyer in me. There is a legal principle called Statute of Limitations, and generally it's 1 to 3 years. If you get injured, you have 1 to 3 years, depending on the claim and the state, to file a lawsuit. Well, these policies are claims made, correct? So
no, these are typically occurrence, but
occurrence. Okay. Oh, so it's good. So
yeah.
if it's an occurrence, we're year 10 of the franchise agreement, the franchisee is not renewing, and then the claim comes in year 11, then we're okay as long as that we had.
If the claim, it doesn't matter when the claim is presented to the insurance company other than statute of limitations, under an occurrence-based policy, if the occurrence happened during the policy period, coverage will be afforded. It's when you get into claims made coverages that's not, the claim has to be made during the policy period. But by and large, typical franchisor or franchisee relationships, we don't see claims made policies on a general liability or stuff like that. Now, we'll see them in specialty coverages like employment practices liability insurance, which is, I think, the biggest thing that we pay claims on now is EPLI coverages. You'll see claims made type coverages, but that's standard in those types of coverages. Typically, occurrence-based policies are what we normally deal with, and is what we want the policy to reinforce as long as the franchisee's open.
So when a franchisee is either terminated or expired, I think now when I got the folder, I'm going to put on top of that folder the last insurance and then put it in the file just in case.
Correct. There could be some work needed to be done by an insurance provider for a franchisee who closes, like discontinued operations. There could be some products and completed operations exposure that still remains after the franchisee is no longer in business. So all of that work would need to be done, and that would be done on an individual basis. But correct, an occurrence-based policy, if somebody shows up 1 year and 13 or 11 months past the date of the accident and can prove, I think in Texas, I know it's 2 years on those kind of bodily injury type claims that you have to be able to submit a claim.
Doug, I've seen this in franchise documents, and I think it's probably as a result of the joint employer. You must name us, franchisor, as additional insured or additional named insured on all policies except your employment or workman's comp policy. I've seen that carve out a couple of times. What are your thoughts?
I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said.
Excellent.
I do not want to name the franchisor as additional named insured under workers' compensation or employment practices liability insurance. I am not an attorney, but I am an insurance professional, and my attorneys tell me that brings possible harm to the franchisor in the event of joint employer case could be alleged and proven that we've now brought the franchisor into the franchisee's business, and we don't want to do that. I will tell you, there is a great difference of opinion on how to do that. I personally, my E&O carrier, secondly, is not in favor of me adding the franchise or as additional named insured under the work comp and EPLI policies.
Okay, we got that certificate now.
Huh?
Am I going to review 2 certificates then? How does that work? For my franchisees, we talked about reviewing. I'm reviewing their certificate of insurance. I'm looking for additional named insured. I'm looking for the policies. Is that one certificate that says additional named insurance for all except claims 3 and 4? How does that work? Or is there 2 policies?
Under that certificate, under the workers' compensation, the EPLI doesn't even have a box. It has to go into other coverages. We will denote on there no additional insured on the work comp and EPLI policies. I will warn you, as we sit here, there is probably a different opinion on how that is to be handled. I'm just telling you my opinion, and my E&O, my errors and omissions carrier, takes the position of we would not like that to be done.
Doug, what I want to do is we're going to repost this later on our website. I want to work with you to actually put the ideal, it's going to be an item 8 FTE disclosure and an accompanying franchise agreement provision. Just lay out kind of our best practices. So if you'll work with me on that, I'd love to kind of do, we can distribute it both through the website, and anyone listening can email us. But are you interested in helping me do that? And we'll share.
Sure, absolutely.
Optional, and here you go, and kind of lay it out. I think that'd be a big help.
Yes.
And I'd like to do that. Then we got a little more time left. What I want to do, I know you offer a great, awesome certificate of insurance product and monitoring with Easy Cert, but let's give some practical tips for those people that aren't quite there for whatever reason. Let's talk about setting up their own, or once again, practical points to try to set up their own monitoring system.
Well, I think this list that we just posted up is at the minimum information you will have to gather to set up a monitoring system on your own. Again, with 3 locations and 2 required coverages, I don't think you need a sophisticated computer system. That changes as we move up the board. If we have 25 locations and each one has 5 required coverages, we're all of a sudden into a pretty deep pile of paper. And you have to be attentive to the renewal date. So every policy has an annual policy, and if they're not all bought on the same date, that means that work is going to come up 12 months from the time that it was last done, and it becomes very time consuming. But you need to know the expiration dates, and you need to notify the franchisees, I think 60 days prior to expiration, to tell them it's a great day in Drum Pizza franchise business. You're compliant now. We're going to be expecting a new certificate of insurance in the next 60 days. Have a great day and go make more pizza. And then 30 days, we need to remind them. And then possibly 10 days, we need to remind them. And then on the day of, we probably need some email to go out to the franchisee saying, oh, by the way, tonight at midnight or last night at midnight, you became non-compliant. You need to send us your new workers' compensation certificate. And it's not that it can't be done individually, but I think a franchisor's assets, their payroll and their time can be better spent growing their system instead of tracking all of these insurance certificates. So
now that's great. What is that oh no moment when I realized the certificate's expired? Franchisor is like, oh, let's do this, and wait a minute. I mean, it's midnight. Do we call you and shut the store down, or what is that? I got to act fast.
Well, the worst I owe is the lawsuit you've been served paper. It's walking in the door over something that happened in Arizona or Chicago or New York, and that's somebody. And then we go look for a certificate of insurance, and the last one that we had is 2 years old or 3 years old. So now we're on pins and needles till we get new certificates of insurance, and hopefully everything's been done correct and bills were paid and certificates were made. It is a very frustrating. It is very frustrating to go through it when we have an actual loss has occurred. So you have to stay ahead of the expiration dates. If you fall behind the expiration dates, it's like a pilot flying an airplane. If you stay ahead of the airplane and you know what the airplane is going to do, you can react. When you get behind an airplane, you're behind the airplane. It's hard to ever get back out in front of it. And so we coach franchisors that if you set up your system that you are monitoring their insurance renewals and you truly expect people to have the correct insurance and you monitor that, then it's always done. And
but here's my analogy for you, Doug. I got a franchisee in Bryan, Texas for Drum Pizza, Heath Groves. The guy is wild card. I find out insurance is 2 years old. It is midnight. Do I shut him down right away and then figure this out? Can I call my insurance guy and at least get some temporary coverage? Do I call his last insured? What do I do?
I think it depends on what your attorney put in your FTD language, that they possibly have a forced place scenario in there where it gives the franchisor the ability to force place insurance on a franchisee and bill him for those costs, because forced placed insurance is way more expensive than just regularly purchased insurance. When you're forced placing coverage, the insurance company knows that there's a high likelihood that there's going to be a claim here because it's forced place coverage. But that's usually addressed in the FTD on the what if scenarios. If you don't purchase insurance and do not prove that you've purchased insurance to us, we will force place it on you and bill you accordingly. So typically that language is in an FTD.
Yep. And then, is there the equivalent, I know for auto, the underinsured, uninsured? Can a franchisor get that? I got sued because of Heath's location and he didn't have his, but I had my uninsured, underinsured policy that protects me?
Well, we don't know if that's going to be a general liability loss or an actual auto loss to the franchisor that was not involved in the auto loss. But auto, liquor liability, those types of heavy casualty item lines, we want to pay particular close attention. Personally, if I was serving alcoholic beverages and the franchisee cannot document that they have liquor liability coverage in place, I'm shutting down, because I can't take that exposure. I can't. You're risking your balance sheet on that franchisee's ability to run his or her bar. Not many people are willing to do that. I would not be. I would even bypass a forced place and I would remove my flag from the premises.
So act fast and minimize exposure, I think, is the answer.
Yeah, very fast. Liquor and automobile are tough areas that we want to pay special attention to. That
all right,
we can have some significant claims.
Question from the audience for you, Doug. Can you talk about franchisees? Can they lower their insurance costs by documenting certain training to reduce worker accident and liability risk? As a benefit of documenting training, if you are sued to show that you trained to prevent, so you're not being perceived as reckless.
The first part of your question was, yes, you can demonstrate training, benefits that you're going to do and negotiate preferred rates. After the loss has happened, the loss has happened. There's not anything that can be done to alleviate that. It may be upon renewal, they might not offer a discounted rate. But if I have a clear advantage over my competition in my training systems that keep people safe. I want to have an insurance company come and visit my location and offer us a rate accordingly based on what we're doing to lower rates. The franchise business model, I think, is a safer model than a one-off model. So I think insurance companies like and should investigate a franchise system over a one-off system anyway, because we typically do have training, we do have oversight, we do have somebody else watching the business before the claim happens. And so I think that's what we do. And I preach the franchise system because I'm telling the insurance company we have a better risk in this franchise world than we have outside the franchise world. And I truly believe that.
Is this something franchisors should say, hey, insurance guys, don't just check boxes. Ask for this custom, or let's, right?
Sure.
I can imagine just checking boxes.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of value in an insurance company checking out what a franchise is and what they're about and how many they are, and are they in all states, or do we have a concentration of all these guys in one state? One of anything will kill you. 100 of it things you have a much better chance of making a profit. And I think an insurance company that takes a liking to franchises will like this business, because you can change the behavior of a lot of businesses through the use of FDDs, through the use of training, through the use of loss control against a whole bunch of them at one time.
Excellent. I got another question. I think I got it right here. Is for when you come in and you see what the franchisor has been doing, like, hey, here's my Excel spreadsheet, here's my shoebox full of certificates. How often do you see significant issues, significant errors?
Well, inherently, because of what we do, I think people throw their hands up and they go, enough's enough, and we're not doing a good job in this arena. So I think inherently what we find when when our phone rings is somebody that is probably delinquent in checking franchisees' insurance, or they wouldn't have called us in the first place. But once we're involved and we're at 30% insurance compliant across the system, then we want to run that to 50. We want to run that to 60. We want to get to 70, 80, 90, 95% compliant. And that gives us a track to go on. When I first started this business, I would get in with a brand and I would almost become ill because the compliance level was so low. And I'm saying documented compliance. In other words, the insurance might have been purchased. There just is no documentation in anybody's file that it was renewed. But I did learn that people are not going to call me if they're doing a really good job themselves. I'm not going to find the guy that's really doing a great job because he doesn't need me. So inherently, I find people have very low compliance record.
Well, I think it's more of the, why do I need to buy an external hard drive to back up my data? I've never had an issue before. You don't know the risks you have, and as long as you don't get a claim, I guess you're fine. But if you lose your data,
as a system grows and as a system spreads, litigation in business is just inevitable. And once the franchisor gets sued, they usually say enough's enough, and we're not going through this again. We paid $100,000 in defense costs. We didn't do anything wrong, but because we weren't named insured or the franchisee didn't have the right insurance, it cost us a lot of money. And they just say, I'm not doing it again. So, and then we get to work.
Excellent, Doug. Well, we got about 5 minutes left before the hour, and I always like to go under an hour. So I'm going to, I think we're good in all the questions, but yeah, we got the compliance question. So I want to thank you guys a lot. Thanks, Doug and Heath. And this is very valuable information, and I like that. And I think this is something I'm going to start pushing towards my clients, because if you're not on top of this, it's maybe too late when you decide to get on top of it.
Yeah, we tried to make Easy Cert That's the name of a company that does the tracking for us. We try to make them as little revenue demanding as possible. That is not how we make money. We ultimately make money by selling insurance to the franchisees, an FDD compliant program. I'm not in favor of mandatory programs. I would like the franchisee to have the ability to make a choice, and it's up to us to earn our sales. But because we know the franchisor and we know the FDD, we know what's required, typically we can put out a product that the franchisee is interested in. And that's how we make money. So the Easy Cert business, give us a call. We'd love to help your brand. We will make it as inexpensive as we possibly can. And typically we can make it very inexpensive. So.
And I love it. Anytime I get a franchisor with an insurance question, I give him to Doug and make Doug answer the question for free. He's really good like that. So if you guys even have just a quick question, feel free to reach out because he knows insurance and I know I don't, so I defer to him.
And if you're looking for ideas, as stated earlier, we're not attorneys. That's what we have Mike Drum for. But if you're looking at your FDD and saying, okay, as we was on a previous slide, what are my potential exposures? We can provide some insight to you. Say, hey, EPLI 10 years ago, employment practices liability, was not really an insurance. It wasn't anything anybody ever thought about. We fast forward 5 years ago now, and it's something we pay out claims. We see claims for all the time: hiring, firing, sexual, harassment, and things like that. So as times change, insurance evolves to move that way. So your FDD might not have had an insurance update in 5-6 years. If you're looking and thinking, well, what kind of things we run into, we'd be more than happy to put something down on paper and say, hey, these are some typical things you might face in your industry. And then you can speak with your FDD attorney to talk about, okay, what you need to add or not add. And we're more than happy to do that.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Mike, I appreciate